Hey, what's up, guys? This is Brian at Whisper Status 74. Welcome to the community. Welcome to the channel. Today's video will be about choosing your next 8K or 4K TV. Now, many of the questions are very obvious, but there's probably one question that you haven't really asked yourself, and it may be the most important.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me this evening. This video talks about what you should consider when buying your next TV. It is typically a very large purchase, a purchase that should last you 3, 5, 10 years. Now, a lot of things that we talk about are very obvious. Chief among them, price, value, location, size, what your use case is or usage. Is it sports? Is it video games? Will it be in a dark room? Will it be in a bright room? So location is very, very important. Choosing which technology to go with, whether it's an OLED or an LED, mini LED, micro LED, QD-OLEDs, so on and so forth. The one thing most people don't consider, and it's something that I want to bring up as it's a question that I get asked a lot in the comments, is what do you currently have? What is it that you're coming from? That typically is one of the most important things that most people don't consider. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is something that I read in the comments all the time. You know, Brian, I have, or it will start off with asking a certain question. What do you think of a Sony A80J, a Samsung QN90A, an LG OLED? All these different questions. And the first question I have, or will say is, or I should ask is, what do you currently have? And a lot of times people wonder why that's important. When you jump from one technology to the other, or even one manufacturer to another, they all have very distinct looks, very distinct strengths and weaknesses. And yes, they all have weaknesses. They all have their shortcomings. The reason why I want to talk about it more than anything is I went through this myself many years ago with plasma versus LCD at the time. And I had done projection LCD, I had done all kinds of different technology, and then finally ended up with a plasma. And why I talk about this is we only have, the written review. We have those of us on this platform, and there are many of us nowadays. There wasn't that many of us 3, 4, 5 years ago. When I was looking at plasma, that was the king. And plasma is still king, according to even myself and many of you. But reading about plasma, hearing about it, all the adjectives, the written word, even seeing displays on YouTube, as you can see behind me, audio, visual. These are things that are interesting in the sense that you'll hear our adjectives or our descriptions of it, but you really can't see it for yourself until you bring them home. And anything else, any large purchases, you can go test drive a car you've been hearing about. You can go buy reviews for movies, video games, and then eventually see them yourself and disagree or agree. Even if you're somebody talking about sports, you can sit back and say, I disagree with that guy on ESPN or on a podcast. TVs and audio-visual projectors are different. You're really taking our word for it, and you won't know unless you can walk into a store and see it for yourself, which actually doesn't really help a lot of the time. But until you can bring them home, it's very hard to tell if what we're describing is what you'll see. More importantly, not knowing your own tastes. So what I always hear in the comments too is regurgitation of another channel's words. I heard from this person that this is this, and I heard from that person that this is this. If you ask them or continue to comment with them, a lot of times you'll find that they don't have the panel themselves. I've had this discussion about large TVs. The TV behind me is an 83-inch. Many people will say large TVs are no good for this or for that. My question was always, well, have you had one? More times than not, the answer to that is no. The reason I compare plasma and LCD is back in the day when plasmas were so sought after. They were very expensive. They were untouchable because of the price, and burn-in was a problem. Does that sound familiar to what we're hearing now? And bringing it up now is OLEDs are more affordable than ever. Burn-in is less of a concern. So a lot of you are considering them. A lot more channels have them versus just talking about them. But for many of you, it's LED versus OLED. My point of the video is, what do you currently have? And what do you currently like? What is your taste? What is your preference? Very important to know that. So a lot of questions I hear are choosing between an 85-inch Samsung Q190A versus, say, an A80J. That's one that I addressed recently. They are extremely different. But to hear that some people will buy an OLED and feel that they're not bright enough. Now, you're going to hear in the comments, or you've heard from me, due to the contrast ratio and perceived brightness, OLEDs are penny bright. Well, the reality is, if you don't find them bright enough, they're not bright enough. It really comes into what you're used to. If you have a older Samsung LCD or coming from a Sony LED, and then you end up buying an OLED, you might find them dim. Doesn't mean that you're wrong. Doesn't mean that I'm right. When you go from different channels or different reviewers, they might find issues with a certain panel's motion. They may like a certain kind of motion. Some might like a more accurate image. Some might like the gaming performance. So those are kind of easy to figure out when you're talking about things like Samsungs don't have Dolby Vision. Well, I don't want that because it doesn't have that. That makes the conversation easy. The harder one is which technology to go with. If you're used to a plasma, for instance, we'll go back to plasma. If you're used to a plasma, OLEDs are typically what we recommend, simply because you've never really seen any haloing or blooming. So when you go from a plasma, you're kind of used to the inky blacks, you're kind of used to the contrast ratio. When it comes to having an LED, a lot of times we'll recommend another LED or mini LED. The only times that we don't is when you say, I want something totally different. Now, for me, to be very honest, I had read about plasma for many, many years, from many, many reviewers back in the day. David Katzenmeyer from CNET, chief among them. And I always heard Pioneer, QD-OLED, Panasonic, plasma. I had Samsung LCDs. Before that, I had a projection LCD from Sony, a Grand Vega, that was trying to be a plasma. I didn't love that image. Having LCDs bright, sharp, clean, and then getting a plasma, I remember when I first got one, I was disappointed. Now, many of you in the comments are going to go, blasphemy, plasma is the best. Now, plasma is absolutely amazing. But listening to all the reviewers, you have to understand, what is it you like? Knowing what you like is very important. You want high output of light. You want high peak brightness. You want maximum HDR effect. You need to look at this. Now, for me, this is a C1 83-inch OLED. I have another one upstairs, an A80J at 77 inches. I think they're plenty bright. I enjoy the contrast ratio. I enjoy the blacks. Going from LCD to plasma caught me off guard. It wasn't very bright. It almost had, the way the image was showing, it almost had a fuzzy look to it in comparison to a clean LCD. Now, I grew used to it and I really enjoyed it. Gaming didn't seem as clean. The motion was better, but I was used to the motion of LCD. And that turned me off initially. And I remember saying to myself, what are all these people talking about? How is plasma the best? Now, in turn, I love plasma. OLEDs were very similar. They burned in. They were very expensive. They were at the initial, they were very, very dim prior to the C8 and the C9. They did burn in. They kind of solved that with the C9, the CX, the C1, and so on and so forth. Panasonic and Sony and others. But if you find them dim, it doesn't mean they're not dim. If you like a brighter image, recently at Value Electronics, I had gamed on the Samsung Q190A and really missed that pure white image, really missed those really punchy colors. Now, if you sit there with a bunch of people that are calibrating and talking, they may say, well, I don't like that. I like a more natural image or a more realistic image. Very important to listen to that and say, well, I don't know if I like that. There is no wrong answer, is my point. So it's so important to know what you're coming from. If you're coming from a very bright LED, and you've heard, for instance, I've had people that have had Q90Rs. Brass Tacks, who was a good friend in the UK, many of you know him from YouTube. We had this discussion over a year, was going from a Q90R, which was very bright, and he really enjoyed it, to a larger LG CX. The conversation was almost daily about contrast ratio, deeper blacks. Now, he totally understands that we were just bouncing the ideas off one another, but it was all about relinquishing HDR impact, high peak brightness, the wider color gamut of Samsung. These are really, really important. You might come from a Samsung with a higher color gamut and then watch an OLED and say, doesn't seem as colorful to me. Doesn't matter if that's 100% accurate. They do have a wider color gamut, by the way, the quantum dot. But it's knowing what you have and what you like. No matter who you follow on YouTube, we'll just talk about YouTube here for a second, other than forums where it's really all written. On YouTube, I would tell you to watch everyone. There's not one YouTuber out there I would say don't watch. Watch them, follow what they say, understand their tastes, and then take that and disassemble it. That is your research. But when you go by what they say, think about their taste. What do they like? I very much enjoy OLED. I have, again, 2 of them currently. I do miss LED. I do love that high peak brightness. Now, for me, being in a very dark room, I am in a dedicated home theater here. It's completely light controlled. I absolutely think that OLEDs are bright enough. But I will tell you this, watching OLEDs in comparison to LEDs, where I have compared them side by side, that never really shows well on YouTube. In my comparisons for myself, I would say the impact of a bright LED feels 3D. It leaps out at you. But OLEDs, though they don't get as bright, they're less HDR in terms of it looks almost painted on in comparison to leaping off the screen as this leaps off the screen. But knowing which you prefer. Now, there are trade-offs. You would trade that high peak brightness in a few scenes for overall picture quality. Which one is more important to you? Samsung and Sony have different ways of achieving motion. One might feel slower than the other. They might not be different in speeds, but they handle them differently. Like even on camera right now, this OLED looks like it's blooming. It isn't. So it's hard to tell through YouTube what's what. But you have to know what you like. Watch everyone. Do your research and then discern what's important to you, what matters to you. But going from one technology to the other can be daunting. I've had many of you go from LEDs to OLEDs and you're very disappointed. You're saying to yourself like, wow, it's just so dim. The reflection handling is not as good as my last panel. You're not wrong. We can say in the comments, so you're absolutely wrong, they're bright enough. If you don't think they're bright enough, they're not bright enough. The perception is truth. I am very allergic now to blooming. I don't like seeing blooming. I don't like off-angle viewing being off. But why is that? Going from LCD to plasma, getting used to plasma for a number of years, I went right to very bright LEDs, and I could not understand why the blooming was so crazy. There was flash lighting coming from the bottom of the panel. Everything had halos around it, and I was very much thinking, why did none of the reviewers bring this up? Well, they're viewing them one at a time, not coming from one to the other. That is what's so important. You were talking about size, value, money, but it's key to know what you have and if you're happy with it. You're very happy with your latest mini LED, chances are you may not like a plasma or an OLED. You might be surprised and you might love it. I have many people that have had OLEDs then move over to a really bright LED and say, wow, that's amazing. So a lot of questions I get, would I choose a Z9J over an A90J? You know, they're very different animals. You might not even realize that, you don't notice blooming. It doesn't matter. But perception is truth. You love very bright panels. You're not wrong. You love saturated, very contrasty colors. You're not wrong. The key is, what do you actually like? The same goes for manufacturers. But if you follow certain channels and that channel is very much about calibration or very much about accuracy. You have to know that's the image that they prefer. So if they're recommending a panel to you, that's kind of their signature. That's what they like. So take their information with your research and then move on to another channel. And then again, compile them and figure out of that what you like. Unfortunately, these panels are very expensive. They're now larger than ever. People will say, buy them, try them out. It's very hard to do that. Returning them is not easy. It is arduous. Many of these stores are now on to people buying numerous panels and bringing them back. You might get stuck with something very expensive. So you are trusting, again, our description, how we feel about it, not just in reviews. When you watch reviews years ago, even on ratings.com and a lot of the newer sites, you're going by a number system. With us and a lot of us that do numerous videos on the same TV, you're really trying to judge how we speak. This isn't accurate what's behind you in terms of how it looks to me. And you have many people that can get very clever with editing. They can tone down blooming. They can make blooming worse. So you're really trusting the host of the video. But what you have to really trust is your own taste, your own preference. What is it you like? If you like soap opera effect, you like motion interpolation, you like vivid contrast, you like those things. Are they accurate? They're not accurate. Are they wrong? They're not wrong. Why are they not wrong? If you like them, that's all that matters. A lot of times, all of us get questions for what settings do you want? Tell me this, what do you like? You can have your TV calibrated. Calibration is recommended to get the most accurate image out of your panel, but would you really want to see that image? There's a reason all these settings are in there. Toggle them on, figure them out, but more importantly than anything, figure out what you like. Most importantly, what technology do you already have? If you have a brighter LED and you don't like the blooming or the blacks appear bluish or gray, then that's something you should be asking. You should be saying, hey, look, I'm looking at an OLED because I have an older LED or one from a few years ago and I really want a higher contrast ratio. I really want to see better blacks. Boom, right to OLED. But when you ask the question and you don't know where you're coming from, it's so hard to discern. That's why we brought up speakers. Speakers are even harder than that because you might like louder instead of cleaner, instead of separate. You might like a wall of sound. That's something that I'm talking about here. You have to know what you have first. If you're someone that has a sound bar, chances are you'll love separates, but not the price of separates. Something like a sound bar is interesting. In non-discrete material, you might find that your subwoofer hits with every sound. You close a door, it hits. Somebody hugs, it hits. You have a discrete, many channels, your sub doesn't fire every time something touches. That's something that might turn many of you off. You might have a very large LED and then move on to a smaller OLED. Or you might come from an OLED and then go to a larger LED and just say, wow, it just looks more faded to me. The key is knowing what you want, knowing your preference, and actually discerning what you have and if it makes you happy. Now, people in the video or in the comments will say, well, if you're upgrading, you know you're not already happy. Not so. You might want newer features. You might want variable refresh rate. You might want more HDMIs. And more importantly, you might want a larger panel. The biggest reason to upgrade most times is size. So you have to discern, again, what are you coming from? A lot of times what I hear is even an average LED. Someone will have that TV, they'll love the image. And I hear that a lot with Samsungs, even mid-range Samsungs. Someone will say, yeah, I have a mid-range Samsung. I bought an A80J, and I just do not understand why I don't like it. All the reviews, why isn't this? Well, all depends on how you perceive that image. You might like the bright, punchy colors. Again, when I was gaming the other day, I was using the Samsung Q190A at 98 inches. So I had an Xbox Series X in that video, and I mentioned in that video that we shot at Value Electronics. I went and plugged it into an A90J Master Series, and I was fully expecting to see the black level, to feel the difference in pixel response, and immediately say to myself, oh, I love OLED. I didn't feel that. I actually missed the high peak brightness of the lens flare and the gun firing and the skybox. And I was thinking to myself, wow, it wasn't as different as I thought. So that's what made me also prompt to do this video. Know yourself, know your own personal taste. That is more important than anybody like me saying, get this or get that, which is why I don't say that. I don't say OLED is the only way to go. Back in the day with plasma, I can't tell you how many times I read in forums, oh, plasma's king. Plasma is this, plasma is that. Now you hear more than anything because OLEDs are affordable. OLED, no question. That's not true. What's true is what you feel. There are plenty of people that look at the best OLEDs from Panasonic and Sony and LG and go, I don't get it. I don't understand. And you're not wrong if you feel that way. But again, at the end of this video, figure out what it is you like and then focus on that. Regurgitating what you hear from other channels. Well, this person said this and this person said that. I'll always say to them, what do you think? What is your experience? People recommend projectors all the time, but never own one. Never actually be with one. Then say, well, I don't know why it's not as sharp or the blacks aren't as good. Well, what are you comparing it to? Are you comparing it to an OLED in a very dark room? You can take this same TV, put it upstairs and open the windows and it'll be an absolute mirror. If you're going from an average LCD to a C1, put it in the brightest room possible, you're like, what's all this about? Or let's face it, when you have OLEDs, you're a big hockey fan and that screen dims, you're like, that didn't happen on my cheap Samsung. I hear that one a lot. So again, at the end of this video, and I do appreciate your patience, really know your own preference. Think about what has come before. And the contrast between the two is really the most important answer or question you should be asking yourself. What do I like about what I have? Why do I want to try something different? And then do your research and find out there what it is you like about what they're saying. For me, I am very happy with OLED. I do love the image. I do love the gaming features. I love the black level. I love when I'm talk about being descriptive. I love when I'm in a video game and I'm going into a dark area and that area is very dark. Now, HDR implementation on many of these games don't make that the case, but for the most part, I really love that the HUDs don't glow. I love that there's no blooming. I love that there's no bright corners. But do I miss high peak brightness? I do. And every year I do explore that differently. This year I have my eye on the Z9K. I have my eye on the QD-OLEDs. But I'm in this industry. These TVs do change all the time. Always be mindful of whoever you're watching that's of any consequence or that's of any size on YouTube. Chances are they're switching their panels out every year. Be mindful of that. And just think about what you really like. LED, mini LED, OLEDs, which is better? It's really what you choose. One is not better than the other. They're better at different things, but are those things very important to you or are they not? The best way to judge that is, what do you have right now? Do you want something totally different? Or do you want something that's better, brighter? That's what you have to ask yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the comments. Take care. Love you guys.